My name is Sean Crawford. I'm a practicing sculptor, and I've been working out of the Wairarapa town of Carterton for 10 years. This basically move from Wellington to the Wairarapa is kind of a return to a place that I grew up as a child. So it actually holds a bit of history in sort of returning, sometimes because of family reasons. My parents moved back here, and I was finished my degree, and I was working out of a single car shed in Wellington, and it was just one of those things that time seemed right to sort of make that move and sort of, revisit somewhere that I'd actually spent a lot of time as a child. So I did actually have quite a bit of meaning sort of already. And the thing I think that really sort of has got into my work since arriving is sort of being back in sort of that rural sort of landscaping. It's kind of gets into your work, so you develop, I don't know, that style. You become sort of a part of the landscape. I always find it sort of, when you're feeling it and you're in tune with it, it tends to sometimes make you quite small. Can be quite uplifting, so it's quite a bit of an inspiration to the self as well. And one of I think the important things is how you're replacing yourself, and the environment sort of begins to sort of influence your practice as sort of an artist, which is kind of one of those things about being in a small town. Sort of sometimes you might feel sort of isolated from the larger picture, but then it also gives you that space within the landscape to sort of develop and sort of grow your practice. I think the ranges are quite sort of special to us here. It's one of those things, looking out from the studio, that you've got those huge sort of imposing sort of forms, and you just can't help that sort of getting into your work. And there's that sort of connection too, that our the house that we've actually taken up is one of the old timber mill cottages, so all the timber from it has actually come from the ranges, and it's kind of one of those things to sort of have that sort of connection to the landscape, and sort of that idea of and those memories from being a child growing up in the Wairarapa as well, and it sort of all sort of comes back. Sort of within sort of my practice, I've sort of had quite a few influences, like taking from, not necessarily always artists, sometimes from the written word, and sometimes from people working in different sort of medias. Like I've quite an interest in sort of the works of Hone Tuwharei, the New Zealand poet, and sort of picked up sometimes kind of those textual references to landscape, and sort of sometimes towards that sort of mythology, and in the realms of the Maori. And I've also got an interest in sort of early New Zealand films, sort of looking at Jeff Murphy and Vincent Ward, and some of the other sort of earlier sort of groundbreaking New Zealand films. And sort of I find that quite the darkness sometimes within the works, or the anti sort of I don't know, sometimes establishment themes sort of ring true to with some of the practices that I'm sort of working on now, and the way my work is sort of heading. But as far as like a New Zealand artist that I'm probably sort of, I don't know if it gets into my work, but it's sort of the works of Bill Hammond sort of ring quite to me. It's makes quite an intense statement, which I find sort of is not something that I push in the 2D sense, but it actually gives someone to actually sort of follow, and to reference now and again, even if it's not overly visible. And kind of my father is sort of a good influence as well, because it's one of those things that being a boat builder, and it's one of those things being a kid growing up with him, it was developing and watching his level of craftsmanship, and it's something that's kind of stuck with my work, that I always try to develop a sort of an idea of finishing, and whether that's kind of a homage to him and what I basically took on from him as a child is something. And he's to actually work on a couple of pieces with him was kind of quite quite a privilege that we made a couple of purpose-built bits of furniture, and it was a very special time to actually work with him when he was sort of still very sort of physical enough to sort of pitch in and give us a hand, and he's still there as far as advice and everything goes, and it's kind of one of those things that, you know, he's actually sort of taught us, you know, something that I can really take forward. Since sort of finishing, basically when I left Wellington, I'd finished my design degree, so it was kind of that thing that I wasn't actually going to go and practice as a designer, but it was something that I think influenced my work, that I was quite sort of taken with the modern, and a lot of my earlier work is in that kind of modern style, so you're looking for always for that element of harmony and balance within the work, so it's quite contemporary, quite modern, and a lot of these works actually sort of led back to what I almost call as like a Pacific modern, which is when I started to weave stainless steel using like a contemporary weaving technique, but actually using a sort of a modern material. And these works were sort of quite well received and taken on board to you know, mix in with contemporary architecture. So I actually sort of found myself quite a receptive client base and people that were willing to work and sort of commission. It's always sort of been an interest of mine as sort of architecture and sort of contemporary, but also sort of the Gothic revival style, which is kind of has led into sort of other sort of works, and sort of within relation to the modern, it's kind of one of those things that I projected, and a lot of people said that, you know, you've produced these things, you know, from this I don't know, would have space or place of sort of chaos. It was like talking about my studio, and I've had a woman come here and she said, well, it's amazing that you can actually produce stuff from the way you are, which was, she was probably drawing to sort of the idea of, as an individual, that imperfection behind the work, which is myself, and it's that, I suppose it's that real human quality that I'm striving to in those works, to provide an element of perfection, but then the flawed thing is basic myself behind the work, which is something that sort of led to another kind of body of works where, so and almost you're actually splitting yourself down the middle. So you've got this idea of searching for perfection. You've got the ideal of striving towards that modern perfection, but then you've got to embrace the imperfect, which is kind of, it seems more personal. So you're almost kind of splitting yourself down the middle, and maybe even greying the line and going backwards and forwards between them. So I think some of my contemporary works actually just about touched sort of on these themes until I sort of got into what you'd call sort of the component rebuilding of works, which means kind of taking an object and rebuilding the surface with, I've started with laser cut components. So you're actually using a graphic, which is returning to that sort of design thing, but taking it to another level. So probably my I would say the crossroad piece for me was Fortified, which was a attacking dog pulling at a chain, which was completely fabricated about with AK-47s and Armalite rifles. And I think it was kind of one of those things that was around the whole vicious dog, and the news were feeding on that. So it was playing on that whole idea of who are we to sort of put these qualities onto a dog when it's human qualities that we're sort of revolted by. So it was kind of that whole aspect of war and sort of the horror and sort of, you know, what is the human quality that we put on to these dogs, or dismiss them from, that we have ourselves. So that was kind of quite a ground-breaking work for myself, and it actually led to another kind of exploration of this theme, and using the same sort of technique, which led to other works like Dominion, which was a play on the sheep being taken on. It's from the coat of arms for New Zealand, which was the straddled sheep being loaded on to a boat, and that's pretty well sort of known, but people have to identify with the object, and that was fabricated from poppies, which was about the sacrifice of generations of young soldiers going over and fighting. It was the product of the land, being the sheep, but sort of being that human quality that was taken and sacrificed in lands for, the dominion and sort of the greater good. And it's kind of, those works sort of developed through there, and I found that one work finished and it sort of asked another question or another tangent, so it sort of kept moving. So it's always that thing, the answer is kind of never straight in front of you when you finish one work. It's just you've finished it and you've asked yourself another question, so you move on to the next piece. Within sort of the body of works that was with the component rebuilding, it sort of rewrote or carried on that interest in sort of the Gothic and the Gothic revival, and sort of I've read a few books about sort of the Gothic New Zealand and sort of how back to that landscape and sort of influencing and sort of isolating and probably developing on that sort of settler mentality. So with kind of that in mind, it was kind of, I think was probably born sort of with that feral piece, which was my first work that I actually did with taxidermy and the component rebuilding. So you've got kind of a multimedia approach to the practice, and sort of taking the component works and sort of bringing that element of taxidermy, which I kind of spent a bit of time as a kid with basically houses that actually had sort of taxidermied, and as a child you're always kind of affected sort of by, I don't know, the staring eyes or the sort of the darkness following you around the room, and that sort of, I kind of picked up on that sort of almost Victorian sort of element to it, that it was sort of embracing the Gothic from the like aspects of literature, and so I found it was quite a nice, and with that, using that sort of essence of something that was alive, and it's one of those things that people get a reaction from it. They really like it or they don't. So you're basically confronting more and sort of asking sort of questions of the viewer. And I think the feral piece was nice because it was something I'd seen quite a lot as a kid, which was the pig hung in a competition style with a meat hook through its throat, and that's kind of what you used to see as a kid, sort of outside the pubs and that, when the hunters would come back. And to actually take something that was sort of kind of looking at that kind of that almost a struggle within a Gothic novel of a hero and sort of the anti-hero, and actually having something that was sort of strung up and sort of an ode to the World Cup, because the whole front of the pig was fabricated out of like silver ferns, so it was kind of asking those sort of questions of the animal sort of almost lying in the ferns after battle, after it lost its life, and sort of being the whole front of the body being mapped in fern, and just making those references to sort of the struggle and sort of the hype around sort of the World Cup, and sort of how we sort of identify those New Zealand sort of icons. So for moving for that, it's actually something that's developed, and with the body of works that I'm working through at the moment, it's taking that again to another, but actually providing a more of a concise body of works around sort of that whole settler mentality. I think that there's involved with the an interesting sort of exploration into that acclimatization societies that basically introduced animals in a sort of an ad hoc way to actually provide food, to provide the elements of hunting, nostalgia, and these animals then sort of took on their own sort of lease of life throughout New Zealand. You had rabbit plagues, you had deer culling, you had 1080, all contentious issues now that developed from sort of the introduction of these animals to sort of to change or alter or live within the landscape, which is kind of taking on that sort of mentality of sort of almost going against the landscape. This body is probably moving towards a more concise, collection, and probably for the future, it's going to be one of those things that I could see within the realms of actually producing and sort of sending works overseas. I'm very keen to just take what my voice would be, what I've basically learnt, what it affects me, what gets into my work, and actually show it on a wider stage. And I think that this body of works is actually something that I'll be proud, or that I'll actually take forward. So whether I've actually finally asked that or answered that question, I probably doubt it. But at least it's kind of one of those things that people can actually get a clear message from this body, and hopefully sort of get some reaction from it.